Hey guys, tonight we're going to journey to a time and place that shaped the very map of our world, but perhaps not in the way you might expect. Forget the grand battles for a moment, and instead, let's dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and ease into the harsh, beautiful, and utterly relentless reality of the Mongolian steppes. This isn't just about conquest. It is about a unique civilization, a machine forged by survival. Take a deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and let's unravel the secrets of what it truly meant to be part of the most formidable nomadic force in history. And if you're enjoying these little dives into the past, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. Tonight, we begin with a truth that might surprise you. Before the name Genghis Khan struck terror across continents, before the roar of a united empire echoed across the vast plains, there was only survival. You see, the Mongols weren't born conquerors. They were born into a brutal, unforgiving world where every sunrise was a gamble and every sunset brought the threat of freezing winds, gnawing hunger, or worse still, the flash of a rival tribe's blade. Imagine, for a moment, waking up on a vast, empty plain, the wind whipping at your face, smelling of dry grass and distant campfire smoke. There's no soft mattress beneath you, no warm blanket from a department store. Your bed is a crude animal hide spread over packed earth, shared with the rest of your family inside a drafty, felt yurt. The air bites with a cold that seeps into your bones, a constant companion that only a roaring fire or intense physical labor can temporarily banish. This isn't the romanticized image of noble warriors. This is the raw, unvarnished truth of a dark forest, where every clan, every small band of nomads was pitted against another in a desperate scramble for resources. Life before Temujin, the man who would become Genghis Khan, was a kaleidoscope of shifting alliances, sudden betrayals, and swift, brutal raids. You might wake up one morning to find your small herd of sheep and goats, your very lifeline, gone, swept away by a rival clan under the cover of darkness. Or worse, you might find yourself surrounded, your meager camp plundered, your men slain, and your women and children dragged away to become slaves or concubines. There was no overarching law, no benevolent ruler to appeal to, no concept of justice, beyond what you could enforce with your own spear and your own courage. The only constant was the vast, indifferent sky above and the endless whispering grass underfoot. In this world, the concept of savagery wasn't a choice. It was a curriculum taught from birth, a necessary skill for staying alive. You learned to ride before you could walk steadily, to shoot a bow before you could read. You learned to trust only your closest kin and to always be prepared for the worst. This was the crucible that forged Temujin. His own childhood story reads like a grim folk tale designed to chill young children into obedience. He wasn't born into power or privilege, even by the standards of his fragmented people. When he was just 9 years old, his father Yashige, a minor chieftain, was poisoned by a rival tribe during a journey. One moment, you're riding proudly beside your father, a young boy with a future. The next, he's gone, and your world shatters. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. His father's former allies, seeing their chance, abandoned Temujin's family, leaving his mother, Folan, with 7 young children and virtually no resources. Imagine the sudden, biting cold of rejection, the betrayal. One day you belong, the next you are an outcast, vulnerable and alone on the merciless steppes. The family was reduced to a life of extreme poverty, surviving on wild berries, roots, and whatever meager fish they could catch. Hunger was a constant, aching presence. The wind wasn't just cold, it howled with the specter of starvation. They were hunted, forced to move from camp to camp, always looking over their shoulders. Temujin, even as a young boy, had to step into the role of protector and provider, a crushing burden for a child. There is a particular incident, seared into history, that underscores the brutal reality of his youth. He once hunted a lark, a small bird, only to have his half-brother Bector steal it from him. In a world where every morsel of food was a matter of life and death, this wasn't just childish squabbling, this was existential. Temujin, driven by desperation and a nascent, fierce will, shot Bector dead with an arrow. It is a shocking act, but in the context of the dark forest, it speaks volumes about the lessons he was learning. Survival demanded ruthlessness. But the trials didn't end there later. Temujin himself was captured by a rival clan. The Taichud, who had once been his family's kinsman, he was enslaved, forced to wear a heavy wooden kang around his neck and hands, a humiliating and crippling device that prevented him from escaping. Every day was a stark reminder of his powerlessness. The feeling of the rough wood chafing against your skin, the inability to feed yourself easily, to scratch an itch. You're dragged from place to place, a prisoner, completely at the mercy of your captors. It's a moment of profound degradation, a complete stripping away of dignity. But even in this lowest of lows, something flickered within him. He learned patience, observation, and the absolute necessity of escape. He eventually managed to slip away during a festival, hiding in a river and covering his face with weeds until the Taichud trackers gave up. This wasn't just a boy escaping. This was a future emperor learning the bitter lessons of hardship and resilience. So, when we talk about the barbarity of the Mongols, understand this. It was first and foremost a refined, brutal art of survival, honed in a land that offered no quarter. It was the only way to endure, to protect your own, to rise above the endless cycle of raiding and revenge. It was a philosophy etched into their very beings by the wind, swept plains, the biting cold, and the constant threat of annihilation. This wasn't a civilization born of leisurely contemplation. It was a civilization forged in the fiery furnace of relentless struggle. And it was this struggle that gave birth to the machine we're about to explore. Now, imagine for a moment you are one of these warriors, having survived a childhood of unimaginable hardship. You've earned your place, you've proved your worth, and you're ready to ride. But you are not riding just any horse. You are part of an ingenious system, a living, breathing military marvel that allowed the Mongol armies to move with a speed and agility that baffled and terrified their enemies. This wasn't just about having good cavalry, it was about transforming cavalry into an unstoppable, sustained force. The core secret, the beating heart of the world's fastest army, was elegantly simple: 1 man, 3 horses, or more often, even more. Each Mongol warrior, the Sonenkur, was typically accompanied by a string of at least 3, sometimes up to 6 or even 8 Mongolian horses. These weren't the towering, majestic war horses favored by European knights, bred for crushing charges and carrying heavy armor. No, the Mongolian horse was a different creature entirely. They were stocky, relatively small, usually standing around 13 hands high, with shaggy coats, strong legs, and incredibly tough hooves that rarely needed shoeing. They worked fast over short distances, but their endurance was legendary. They could travel for days, even weeks, across harsh terrain with minimal food and water, often simply grazing on whatever sparse grass they could find while on the move. Imagine the tireless strength, the sheer will of these animals, a living embodiment of the steppes themselves. The genius of the one-man, three-horses system lay in its elegant simplicity and efficiency. A warrior wouldn't ride a single horse to exhaustion. Instead, he would cycle through his string of mounts. You might ride one horse for a few hours, then dismount and quickly transfer your saddle to a fresh one, leading the rested horse behind you, allowing it to graze and recover its strength as you continued your journey. This meant that the horses were constantly running, but also constantly recuperating. It was like having a pit stop for your mount, except the pit stop was happening continuously, integrated into the very rhythm of the march. The sounds of hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of hooves thrumming across the endless plains, a constant, low rumble that must have sounded like an approaching storm. This wasn't just about riding. It was about managing a mobile herd, a living supply chain. The warrior wasn't just a rider. He was a horseman, a herdsman, a master of his mounts. He knew each horse's temperament, its strengths, its quirks. The bond between a Mongol warrior and his horses was profound, a matter of mutual survival. These horses were not merely steeds, they were comrades, transportation, food, and even shelter in a pinch. Their ability to survive on sparse grazing meant that the Mongol army didn't need elaborate logistical trains carrying fodder, unlike the cumbersome baggage trains that perpetually slowed down European armies. This liberated them. They could cover incredible distances, often 60 to 70 miles a day, sometimes even over 100 miles in a forced march stint for sustained periods, appearing suddenly like ghosts on the horizon, where no enemy expected them. Consider the sheer psychological impact of this. An enemy commander accustomed to armies moving at a snail's pace, burdened by supply carts and slow, moving infantry, would receive intelligence of a Mongol force hundreds of miles away. Days later, before he could even properly mobilize his own defenses, that same Mongol army would be at his gates, a whirlwind of furious horses and deadly archers. It was an unnerving, almost supernatural speed. They weren't just fast, they were relentlessly fast, their momentum building with every passing day, every mile covered. This constant rotation of horses meant that when they finally reached their objective, their mounts were still relatively fresh, ready for the furious burst of battle, the swift charges, and the feigned retreats that characterized their tactics. The very earth would tremble under the weight of this moving, living machine, a testament to the raw power and ingenious organization of the Mongol cavalry. This was the foundation of their lightning campaigns, the secret behind their ability to outmaneuver and overwhelm armies many times their size. And what about sustenance for these lightning-fast armies? How did hundreds of thousands of men and their multitude of horses travel across vast, desolate landscapes, often for months on end, without the elaborate supply lines that crippled other empires? Forget the traditional ideas of military provisions, of wagon trains laden with grain and preserved meats. The Mongol answer was as ingenious as it was brutal, a system perfectly adapted to their nomadic lifestyle and their most valuable resource, the horse. Their military rations weren't carried in sacks. They were literally beneath them. The primary liquid sustenance for a Mongol warrior was siftunkumis, or thuvi, or ragged, fermented mare's milk. Imagine, if you will, being on the march, the sun beating down, the dust rising, and instead of water, you reach for a leather pouch hanging from your saddle. Inside, a milky, slightly effervescent liquid that tastes tangy, sour, and faintly alcoholic. This wasn't just a drink. It was a potent source of calories, proteins, and vitamins. The mares in their herds were milked regularly, and the milk was then vigorously churned and left to ferment. The process converted the lactose into alcohol and lactic acid, creating a stable, nourishing beverage that could be carried for days. Every warrior knew how to make it, how to carry it, how to rely on it. It was the energy drink of the medieval steppes, fueling their endurance and keeping dehydration at bay in a harsh, dry environment. But even kumis, essential as it was, couldn't provide all the protein and nutrients needed for sustained, high-intensity warfare. In moments of extreme urgency, when game was scarce or the march too rapid to stop for hunting, the Mongols turned to an even more direct and startling source of sustenance: their own horses. You see, these horses weren't just transportation. They were a walking, breathing larder. In dire need, a warrior would make a small incision in the jugular vein of one of his horses, usually a fresh, strong one. The blood would then be drawn, sometimes directly into the mouth, sometimes into a cup, and drunk. Imagine the warm, metallic taste, the sudden rush of iron and protein revitalizing your body. This was not a pleasant meal, but it was incredibly effective. It provided instant energy and crucial nutrients without having to kill the animal, a vital consideration when your life depended on those very horses. Once a sufficient amount of blood was drawn, the warrior would then plug the wound with a piece of horse dung or a handful of mud, allowing the wound to quickly clot and heal. The horse, though momentarily weakened, would typically recover and be ready to ride again within a short time. This extreme act underscores the deep, almost primal connection between the Mongol warrior and his horse, and the brutal practicality that permeated every aspect of their survival. This wasn't a choice for the squeamish. It was a testament to their adaptability and their willingness to embrace whatever grim means were necessary to keep moving, to keep fighting, to keep conquering. So, while European armies were bogged down by their cumbersome supply trains, carrying provisions for men and fodder for horses, the Mongol army was a self-sustaining unit, a formidable organism. Their horses were both their engine and their pantry. They literally lived off the land, and off the very beasts that carried them. This revolutionary approach to logistics allowed them to outmaneuver, outlast, and ultimately overpower every enemy they encountered. It was a testament to a people who understood the delicate, yet brutal, balance of their environment, and who had perfected the art of making the impossible march possible. Imagine the vast, silent sweep of the Central Asian steppe under a sky heavy with stars, or perhaps just bruised with the coming dawn. You've been moving for hours, maybe days, a relentless, tireless surge across the landscape. Most armies back in these ancient days would be halted, their soldiers huddled by meager fires, bodies aching, eyes heavy with sleep. But you, a warrior of the Mongol Horde, are different. Your body sways with the rhythm of your sturdy pony, a rhythm that has become as familiar as your own heartbeat. You are not just riding, you are living in motion. This is the art of sleeping in the saddle, a seemingly impossible feat that was, for the Mongol warrior, a crucial part of their daily routine, a skill as fundamental as drawing a bow or sharpening a blade. From a young age, you learn to become one with your horse, a seamless extension of its powerful, tireless frame. The Mongolian pony, though small by European standards, was a marvel of endurance, capable of covering incredible distances on sparse rations. And you, its rider, learned to harness its tireless energy not just for speed, but for rest. As your horse trots, its gait a steady, hypnotic beat, you lean forward slightly, perhaps against the rough, warm hide of its neck, or brace yourself against the saddle horn. The constant sway, the gentle bounce, becomes a lullaby. The wind, which might once have seemed a biting enemy, now whispers secrets past your ears, a soft, consistent hum. You might close your eyes not just for a moment of respite, but for true, deep slumber. Your muscles, trained through years of unrelenting practice, instinctively adjust to the horse's movements, preventing you from toppling off. It's an almost unconscious ballet of balance and trust, a profound connection between man and beast forged over a lifetime on the open plains. You breathe with your horse, feel the subtle shifts in its stride, and your body learns to relax into that movement, transforming a potentially jarring journey into a cradle. Think of the impossible distances they covered. While a European army heavily laden with supplies and armor might manage 15 to 20 miles a day, forced to make camp each evening, the Mongols could easily double that, sometimes even triple it. And they did so not just for a day or two, but for weeks on end, through scorching deserts and frozen plains, across mountains and rivers. The secret wasn't just fast horses. It was the ability to keep moving. While the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into darkness, the Mongol host would often continue their advance. Under the vast, star-strewn canopy of the steppe night, illuminated only by the pale glow of the moon or the faint starlight, thousands of men and horses would flow like a silent river across the land. And within that river, many a warrior would be dreaming, his body recharging, even as his steed carried him closer to the dawn, closer to the unseen enemy. This relentless motion wasn't just about speed, it was a psychological weapon in itself. Imagine being an opposing general, receiving frantic reports that the Mongol Horde, thought to be days away, has suddenly appeared on your doorstep, fresh and ready for battle, seemingly out of nowhere. It defied all conventional military logic. How could an army move so fast for so long without stopping for proper rest? The answer lay in this unique, almost mystical ability to turn the very act of travel into a form of recovery. Their enemies sought comfort and rest. The Mongols found it in the rhythm of the march. This continuous flow, this perpetual state of readiness, turned their army into an unstoppable tide, overwhelming defenses and shattering morale long before the first arrow was even fired. It's a testament to the sheer physical and mental fortitude, the intimate bond with their horses, and the ingenious pragmatism that define the Mongol way of war. They mastered not just the art of war, but the art of sustained, unbroken movement, turning the vastness of the steppe into their greatest ally. This was a military machine powered by muscle, will, and the steady, hypnotic beat of 1,000 hooves carrying sleeping warriors across the silent land. Now, let's turn our attention to another ingenious yet often misunderstood aspect of Mongol warfare, their surprising approach to armor. When you envision a barbarian warrior from the steppes, you might picture someone clad in furs and leather, perhaps a crude shield, but certainly not sophisticated protection. Many historical accounts from their European adversaries often depicted them as lightly armored, almost dismissively so, perhaps underestimating them until it was far too late. But the reality was far more nuanced, reflecting the Mongols' deep pragmatism and their remarkable ability to adapt and innovate with what they had. While they did wear hardened leather armor, often lacquered for strength and adorned with metal plates, their true genius lay in an unassuming, almost invisible layer of protection beneath it all. You see, the Mongol warrior frequently wore a tight-fitting garment made of raw, undyed silk directly against their skin underneath their more conventional armor. Imagine the feel of it: smooth, light, perhaps a little rough at first, but surprisingly comfortable, a second skin beneath the bulkier outer layers. This wasn't for comfort or luxury, though it certainly offered both in comparison to coarse wool. This was a piece of life-saving technology, a silent guardian woven into the very fabric of their daily wear. The secret lay in the incredible, almost paradoxical strength of raw silk. Unlike other natural fibers, which tend to snap or tear when subjected to sharp force, silk threads are exceptionally resilient and tough. They possess a high tensile strength, meaning they can resist a lot of pulling force before breaking. So, when an arrow, particularly one of the Mongols' own barbed armor-piercing arrows, struck a warrior wearing the silk tunic, something remarkable happened. Instead of the silk tearing and allowing the arrow to pass cleanly through, potentially carrying fragments of cloth or dirt deep into the wound, the silk threads would actually wrap around the shaft of the arrow. They would not break. Instead, they would be pushed into the wound with the arrow, forming a kind of protective sheath around the projectile. The seemingly minor detail had profound medical implications in an era where infection was a far more deadly enemy than the arrow itself. In medieval battlefields, an arrow wound was often a death sentence, not just from the immediate trauma, but from the brutal extraction process. Imagine a physician, or more likely a battlefield medic with rudimentary tools, having to dig around inside a wound to locate and extract a barbed arrowhead that had broken off or become lodged. This violent probing would inevitably cause further damage to flesh, muscle, and potentially organs, introducing more bacteria and greatly increasing the risk of a fatal infection. The pain alone would be excruciating, a raw agony that few survived. But with the silk layer, the procedure was transformed. When an arrow penetrated the silk, the tough fibers would snag and cling to the arrow's shaft. A skilled medic could then, with surprising ease and far less trauma, gently pull the silk out of the wound. And here is the magic. The silk, having wrapped tightly around the arrowhead, would often draw the entire projectile cleanly out with it. No painful digging, no tearing of additional tissue, no desperate search for a hidden barb. The wound, while still serious, was then far easier to clean and treat, and the chances of infection, though still present, were significantly reduced. It was an elegant, simple solution to one of the most common and devastating injuries of warfare. This was not a brute force approach to protection, like the heavy plate armor of the European knights, which, while effective against swords, could still be defeated by arrows and often became a death trap if the wearer was unhorsed. Instead, the silk lining was an intelligent, subtle defense, a testament to the Mongols' practical ingenuity. It reflected their understanding of both the mechanics of injury and the primitive state of battlefield medicine. It allowed their warriors to remain mobile and agile, unencumbered by massive weight, yet provided a crucial, silent layer of defense that tipped the scales of survival in their favor. It was a perfect blend of lightness, strength, and foresight, a quiet innovation that saved countless lives and allowed the Mongol war machine to continue its relentless advance, often against heavily armored foes who, ironically, might have been less protected in the critical moments after a hit. The humble silk tunic, a forgotten marvel, was truly a life-saving piece of the Mongol warriors' formidable arsenal, a testament to their understated yet profound cleverness. Now, let's explore a weapon that struck not just at the body, but directly at the very heart of the enemy's spirit, the soinmingen, or whistling arrow. This was not just a projectile, it was a psychological device, a tool for absolute control, and a harbinger of terror that spread fear long before it found its mark. The whistling arrow looked much like any other, but its secret lay in its unique arrowhead. Instead of a solid pointed tip, these arrowheads were crafted with meticulously drilled holes or hollow cavities. When fired, the rushing air would pass through these openings, creating a distinct, high-pitched shriek or a deep, unsettling hum, a sound unlike any other on the medieval battlefield. Imagine standing on the vast, silent steppe, the air still and expectant. Suddenly, a single, sharp whistle pierces the quiet. This was the sound of Genghis Khan's personal finmingen. For his warriors, this sound was not just a signal. It was an absolute command, demanding instantaneous and unquestioning obedience. Genghis Khan, in his relentless pursuit of discipline and unity, used these whistling arrows to forge his disparate tribesmen into an unyielding war machine. He would fire his Sumingen in a particular direction, and immediately, every single warrior under his command was expected to loose their own arrow, following the trajectory of his whistling guide, without hesitation, without question. The stories, perhaps apocryphal, but certainly illustrative of the terror and respect he commanded, tell of his extreme methods. He might point his whistling arrow at his own beloved horse, or even, it is said, at his favorite wife during a hunt or a practice session, and his warriors, knowing the penalty for even a moment's delay or dissent, would unflinchingly loose their arrows at the designated target. This was not just military training, it was psychological conditioning of the highest order, an indoctrination into a culture of absolute unquestioning obedience, where personal attachments or logical objections were secondary to the leader's will. The sound of that single whistling arrow became synonymous with the great Khan's voice, his omnipotent presence, an unchallengeable directive that transcended all else. Now, take that single, terrifying whistle and multiply it by thousands. Imagine a vast Mongol horde arrayed for battle. You, an enemy soldier, stand in your heavy armor, shield braced, perhaps with the sun glinting off your helmet. The air vibrates with the nervous energy of anticipation. Then, from the distant Mongol lines, a low, ominous hum begins to build, growing in intensity, rising from a murmur to a piercing shriek. Thousands upon thousands of whistling arrows are loosed simultaneously, creating an unearthly symphony of dread. It's not just the sight of the approaching arrows, a deadly rain descending from the sky. It's the sound. This isn't the dull thud of a normal volley. This is a cacophony of shrieks and wails, a horrifying, disorienting sound that fills the air, drowning out the shouts of commanders. the clatter of weapons, even the beating of your own frantic heart. It is a sound that suggests something supernatural, something beyond human comprehension, an invisible force tearing through the very fabric of the air. This terrifying auditory assault was designed to break the enemy's nerve, to sow confusion and panic before a single arrow even struck flesh. It created a sense of overwhelming, inescapable doom. The enemy might be disciplined, well-armored and brave, but facing an unseen opponent whose presence was announced by such an unnerving shriek, their morale would often shatter. The psychological impact was immense. Soldiers would instinctively flinch, their formations would waver, their discipline would crack under the sheer auditory pressure. It was like a medieval sound bomb, a precursor to modern psychological warfare, and engineered to paralyze the enemy with fear. This was combined with the Mongols' devastating cavalry charges and their deadly accurate composite bows, making the whistling arrow not just a signal, but an integral part of their overwhelming battle strategy. It was a weapon of terror, a testament to their understanding that warfare was fought not just with steel and sinew, but with the very air itself, a sound that etched itself into the nightmares of those who heard it, a terrifying echo of the Khan's unyielding will and the Horde's unstoppable might. Now, let your mind drift with the ancient currents of strategy and structure. Imagine yourself not as a solitary warrior, but as a single, vital cog in a vast, meticulously crafted machine. This isn't the disorganized scramble of tribal skirmishes you might envision. No. The Mongol army, the one that would sweep across continents, was a marvel of scientific organization, a precisely engineered force built on the elegant simplicity of the decimal system. From the very moment you were old enough to sit a horse, you understood your place within this structure. You were part of an Suvi Arban, a unit of 10 men. 10 faces you knew better than your own reflection, 10 lives intertwined with yours by the invisible threads of loyalty and survival. Your Arban leader, a man whose judgment you trusted with your life, was one of you, but also above you, the immediate conduit for orders. Picture a crisp morning on the steppe, the air biting with the scent of horse and damp earth. You, as one of these 10, would move as one, your horse's hooves drumming a synchronized rhythm. Each rider knew his place, each bowman understood his angle. There was no questioning, no hesitation, only fluid, practiced motion. The Arban was your immediate family, your shield, and your sword. But your Arban was not alone. 10 of these Arbans, 100 men in total, formed a Thodiakun, your Jakun leader. Perhaps a seasoned veteran with scars that told silent stories held the authority over your combined 100. This wasn't a loose collection of independent groups. This was a coherent, integrated unit, capable of complex maneuvers. Think of a flock of birds, not each flying its own path, but moving as a single shifting cloud responsive to an unseen signal. That was the Jakun, and the layers ascended. 10 Jakuns, 1,000 formidable warriors, became a Feimingan, 1,000 riders, 1,000 bows, 1,000 lances, all poised for action under the command of a Mingan leader. The sheer scale of it, the sight of 1,000 disciplined horsemen thundering across the plains, must have been a spectacle of awe-inspiring power. This level of organization allowed for incredible tactical depth. A Mingan could act as a self-contained force, capable of flanking maneuvers, rapid charges, or holding a defensive line with unyielding resolve. Finally, At the pinnacle of this decimal pyramid, 10 Mingans formed a Thuffen Mend, a staggering 10,000 warriors. A Tumen was nothing less than a miniature army, a mobile force capable of independent operations for weeks or even months. Imagine the logistical nightmare of coordinating such a force in any other contemporary army. But for the Mongols, thanks to this clear, rigid, and utterly efficient decimal system, it was simply how they operated. Consider the European armies of the time. Often, they were feudal levies, a patchwork of knights loyal to individual lords, peasant militias, and mercenaries. Their command structures were often fragmented, communication was slow, and cohesion was a constant struggle. A knight might refuse an order from a superior he didn't respect, or a lord might withdraw his contingent if he felt his interests weren't served. Chaos and individual glory often superseded collective strategy. The Mongol system, by stark contrast, bred absolute, unquestioning obedience. Commands flowed down the chain with remarkable speed and clarity, from the Great Khan through his Tumen leaders, Mingan leaders, Jachan leaders, down to your Arban leader, and finally to you, the individual soldier. There was no room for dissent, no space for individual glory over the collective good. Disobeying an order, especially in battle, was not just insubordination. It was a betrayal of the entire unit, punishable by death. If one Arban member fled, the entire Arban might face execution. If an Arban fled, the Jachan could suffer. This created an intense, almost primal pressure to stand firm, to fight together, to trust the system. This decimal architecture was the very skeleton of their nomadic survival machine. It allowed them to manage vast numbers of men, to integrate warriors from different conquered tribes into a unified force, and to execute complex battle plans across immense distances with a precision that baffled their enemies. They weren't just fighting, they were operating a perfectly calibrated war engine, each component playing its part, each movement synchronized, relentlessly pushing forward. The wind whispers stories of the battlefield, of cunning and of terror. Now, let's turn to the deadliest card the Mongols held in their tactical deck, the feigned retreat. This wasn't just a simple run and turn maneuver. It was a psychological weapon, a meticulously choreographed trap designed to exploit the very instincts of their adversaries. Picture a battle unfolding on a wide open plain. You are with your Mingan, facing a phalanx of European heavy cavalry, their armor gleaming, their banners flapping defiantly. The initial engagement is often fierce. Mongol light cavalry, with their swift horses and composite bows, would launch volleys of arrows, harassing the enemy, testing their lines, refusing direct confrontation. The enemy, burdened by heavy armor and slower steeds, would struggle to respond effectively. Then, a subtle shift, a signal, perhaps a specific flag wave, a horn blast, or even just the sudden collective turn of hundreds of horses. The Mongol line begins to waver. It looks like confusion, like panic. Horsemen peel away, seemingly fleeing the field, individual riders scattering, some even dropping their weapons in what appears to be a desperate rout. The sounds change from the controlled whir of arrows and the precise thunder of hooves to a seemingly panicked scramble. This is the bait for the heavily armored knights, often driven by a sense of individual glory and a strong desire to finish the battle quickly. This sight was irresistible. An enemy in full flight, the chance for an easy, decisive victory was presented on a silver platter. Their discipline, often already brittle from long marches and the frustration of fighting an elusive foe, would crack. Charge! The cry would go up, an exultant roar from the European lines. The heavy cavalry, ignoring the orders of their commanders to maintain formation, would break ranks. They would spur their horses forward, a thundering tide of steel and flesh, eager to catch the fleeing cowards, to cut them down, to claim the spoils of what appeared to be a collapsing enemy. The orderly lines would dissolve into a chaotic adrenaline-fueled chase. Each night, each foot soldier, driven by the thrill of the hunt, would vie for the first kill, pursuing the scattered Mongol riders deeper and deeper into the prearranged killing zone. But the Mongols were not running in fear, they were retreating with a purpose. Each rider knew exactly where to go, how fast to ride, how to maintain just enough distance to keep the pursuing enemy hot on their heels, yet not so close as to be truly caught. Their smaller, faster Mongolian horses, with their incredible stamina, easily outpaced the heavy war horses of their pursuers. The terrain itself was often part of the trap. The Mongols would lead their enemies through seemingly innocuous dips, around sudden rises, or into areas where the ground might be marshy or uneven, further scattering and disorienting the pursuers. Then, at a predetermined moment, often signaled by another sharp horn blast or the appearance of a specific standard, the fleeing Mongols would pivot. With astonishing speed and coordination, they would halt, turn their horses, and unleash a terrifying barrage. Meanwhile, hidden flanking forces, often archers or heavier cavalry, who had been patiently waiting in ambush, would suddenly emerge from the flanks, completing the encirclement. The pursuing enemy, now utterly disarrayed, exhausted, and often having ridden their war horses to near collapse, found themselves caught in a deadly vise. Arrows, released from the powerful composite bows, would rain down from all directions, striking exposed flanks, felling horses, piercing gaps in armor. The very strength of the European heavy cavalry thundi, their charged thoven, now became their weakness. They couldn't reform their lines, they couldn't maneuver effectively, and their slow, tired horses were easy targets. The sound of thousands of arrows whistling through the air, the guttural cries of the Mongol warriors, the terrified screams of trapped men and horses. It was a symphony of destruction. The hunters had become the hunted. What began as a confident pursuit ended in a desperate, often futile struggle for survival against an enemy that seemed to materialize from thin air. This feigned retreat wasn't just a tactic. It was a testament to Mongol discipline, their superior horsemanship, their intimate knowledge of the terrain, and their profound understanding of human psychology, especially the pride and impetuosity of their European opponents. It was a classic, devastating move that won them countless battles and cemented their reputation as an unstoppable force, a truly lethal trap laid on the vast, unforgiving stage of the steppe. Now, let your thoughts drift to the heart of the Mongol world, the family unit, and the roles within this extraordinary society. Imagine a vast expanse of steppe, rolling green hills meeting an endless sky. Here, life was not just about war and conquest. It was about survival, community, and the tireless rhythm of the nomadic existence. In this world, the idea of total mobilization wasn't a military decree, but the very fabric of society. Every individual, regardless of age or gender, played a crucial, indispensable role in sustaining the Mongol Empire. When the men rode off to war, sometimes for months or even years, the immense responsibility of managing the tribal lands, the herds, and the entire camp fell squarely on the shoulders of the women. This wasn't a passive role. It was one demanding strength, skill, and an unwavering resilience. Picture a Mongol woman, her movements graceful yet purposeful, as she supervises the dismantling of a large Saftingorfers, or yurt. With practiced hands, she and other women would efficiently pack away the felt coverings, the wooden lattice walls, and the central poles, ready for the next move across the pasture. In just an hour or two, a home, the entire village could vanish, leaving only faint traces on the earth. This intricate dance of deconstruction and reconstruction was her domain, ensuring the family unit remained mobile, adaptable, and self-sufficient. But their skills extended far beyond domestic management. Mongol women were, by necessity, superb horsewomen and skilled archers. From a young age, they rode as naturally as they walked, traversing the vast distances of the steppe to herd sheep, goats, and cattle. The bow, a tool of both hunting and defense, was as familiar to them as any household implement. In times of crisis, when raiders threatened the camp, or when the men were too far away, these women were fully capable of defending their homes and their children. They were not merely caregivers, they were protectors, fiercely independent and ready to fight if the need arose. Think of the sounds of a camp bustling with activity, the bleating of sheep, the snorts of horses, the distant calls of children, all overseen by the watchful eyes of the women. They were the primary providers of food, not just by herding, but by processing milk into safardnarag, fermented mare's milk, cheese, and various dried curds. They prepared the meals, stitched the hardy felt clothing from wool, and raised the next generation of warriors and herders. Without their tireless efforts, the nomadic lifestyle, and consequently the Mongol war machine, would simply grind to a halt. They were the unseen, yet utterly vital engine of the empire. And what of the children? In this world, childhood was not a prolonged period of carefree play. From the moment they could sit upright, they were placed on the back of a horse tied securely, learning to balance with the natural sway and rhythm of the animal. They grew up on horseback, a seamless extension of their equine companions. Imagine a small boy, perhaps no older than 5 or 6, already guiding his pony with surprising dexterity, his tiny hands gripping a miniature bow. Archery practice began almost as soon as they could hold the weapon steady. They would shoot at targets, at small animals, developing the keen eyesight, steady hand, and precise timing that would define Mongol warriors. There were no formal schools in the modern sense. The steppe itself was their classroom, the herds their responsibility, and their elders their teachers in the harsh, practical lessons of survival. They learned to endure the biting winds, the scorching sun, the bitter cold. They understood the subtle signs of the weather, the movements of animals, the layout of the land. They were taught to be resilient, resourceful, and absolutely loyal to their family and tribe. They were the empire's future, its living, breathing reserves. Every boy was a potential warrior, every girl a potential matriarch, contributing to the enduring strength of the Mongol way of life. This total mobilization meant that the entire society was structured to support and perpetuate the nomadic military lifestyle. There was no sharp division between civilian and military. Everyone contributed. Everyone was prepared. The strength of the empire wasn't just in its fighting men, but in the self-sufficient, resilient, and fully engaged society that nurtured and sustained them. The women and children of the steppe were not merely bystanders to history. They were its very foundation, weaving the threads of family and community into the invincible tapestry of the Mongol Empire. The wind whispers across the vast, unbroken sweep of the steppe, carrying secrets, carrying stories, and carrying something far more vital for the Mongol Empire: information. Imagine you are a rider, one of the Kashiktan, the arrow quiver men, a vital part of what could be considered the world's earliest truly wide area intelligence network. You are the nervous system of an empire, a human telegraph wire stretching across continents. Your horse, a sturdy, tireless Mongol pony, carries you through the twilight, hooves drumming a steady rhythm on the hardened earth. The saddle creaks beneath you, a familiar lullaby to your journey. You are not just a messenger. You are a living node in a vast, intricate web of observation and communication. Before any campaign, any clash of swords or rumble of hooves, the Mongols did not charge in blindly. Their ferocity was not born of reckless abandon, but of meticulous preparation. Long before the tumens moved, long before the war drums sounded, the whisperers were already at work. Spies, countless, nameless, moved like shadows through the lands marked for conquest. They were the eyes and ears of the great Khan, penetrating cities, mingling in markets, listening to the murmurs of the common folk and the guarded whispers of the nobility. They absorbed every detail, every nuance, the lay of the land, the hidden passes through the mountains, the fordable rivers, the strength and disposition of enemy armies. How many archers? How many heavy cavalry? What was the state of their supply lines? Were the people discontent with their rulers? Was there a rival faction the Mongols could exploit? You, as a spy, might dress as a merchant, a wandering minstrel, even a beggar, blending into the tapestry of everyday life. You'd feel the rough wool of your disguise against your skin, smell the unfamiliar spices of a foreign market, hear the cacophony of a bustling city, the clatter of carts, the hawker's cries, the distant ringing of a blacksmith hammer. Every detail was a piece of a puzzle, painstakingly collected. You'd memorize the faces of important officials, note the architecture of city walls, gauge the mood of the populace through their laughter and their complaints. You'd watch the routes traders used, the water sources, the grazing lands for livestock. Nothing was too small, too insignificant. A dry well could mean disaster for an advancing army. A disgruntled duke could be the key to opening a city gate. This information, once gathered, did not languish. It was sent flying across the vast distances by the very Kashiktan you imagine yourself to be. The Yam, the Mongol postal relay system, was a miracle of speed and efficiency, an ancient precursor to modern communication networks. Picture it, a network of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of relay stations scattered across the empire, each manned by a fresh rider and a string of eager, waiting horses. You ride hard, the wind whipping past your ears, the urgent message clutched tight. As your horse begins to tire, you see a plume of smoke, a cluster of jurs in the distant Surdi, a yam station. You don't even dismount fully. A fresh horse is ready, saddled and snorting, and another rider, already briefed, takes the message from your hand, barely breaking stride. In a blur of dust and thundering hooves, the message continues its journey, covering hundreds of miles in a single day, sometimes 1,000 in 3. Imagine the feeling of that exchange, the brief, intense moment of handover, the rush of adrenaline as you watch the new rider disappear into the horizon, carrying your vital burden onward. You smell the sweat of your spent horse, feel the ache in your muscles. But there's also the deep satisfaction of knowing the message is still in motion, a heartbeat in the Empire's veins. This system wasn't just for military orders. It connected the great Khan to every corner of his vast domain, allowing him to govern with an unprecedented level of real-time awareness, to sense the pulse of his sprawling empire. No general of the era, no king had such a comprehensive, dynamic picture of the world around them. The Mongols never went to war unprepared. They knew the terrain, they knew the enemy's strength, and often they knew the enemy's weaknesses better than the enemy knew them themselves. The whispers of the steppe carried not just news, but the blueprints of conquest. And when those messages arrived, often at the great Khan's own traveling headquarters, the information wasn't just glanced at. It was meticulously analyzed, digested by a council of trusted advisors. Maps, drawn in the dirt with sticks or on parchment, were updated. Strategies were formulated, adjusted, and readjusted based on the latest intelligence. The wind might have been their messenger, but the minds behind the empire were the interpreters, turning raw data into strategic advantage. This wasn't primitive warfare. It was an early form of information warfare, waged with the raw elements of the earth and the unbreakable will of its people. The life of a Mongol was, in many ways, defined by the jur. Not just a tent, not merely a dwelling, but a meticulously engineered, perfectly adapted piece of nomadic architecture. Imagine standing inside one. Even now, you'd feel the soft, thick felt walls surrounding you, providing insulation against the biting steppe winds or the scorching summer sun. The air inside would carry the faint, comforting scent of wood smoke from the central hearth, mingling with the earthy smell of the felt, and perhaps the lingering aroma of cooked mutton or fermented mare's milk. The sunlight, softened and diffused, filters down from the Sutunono, the smoke hole at the very apex of the domed roof, casting a gentle, shifting glow on the interior. This is your home, your family's sanctuary, your movable nation. It is a masterwork of practicality and efficiency, designed for a life lived in constant motion. The walls are not solid wood, but a collapsible wooden lattice, easily folded and unfolded like an accordion. The roof is a series of wooden poles, stretching from the crown ring down to the top of the lattice walls, creating that iconic, gently curved dome shape. All of this is then covered with layers of heavy, waterproof felt, often made from sheep's wool, pulled tight and secured with ropes. It feels sturdy, resilient, like a warm, protective cocoon. As you sit on the floor, perhaps on a felt mat or a few sheepskins, you notice the order within the circular space. Everything has its place. The men's side, the women's side, the place of honor opposite the door, often where offerings are made or important guests are seated. Cooking utensils, wooden bowls, leather pouches, sleeping rolls, thymbe, all are arranged with a functional elegance, ready to be packed away at a moment's notice. There are no permanent walls, no separate rooms, yet the space feels intelligently divided by tradition and daily routine. You hear the soft crackle of the fire, the quiet murmurs of family, perhaps the distant bleating of sheep, or the whinny of horses outside. The jur amplifies these sounds, creating a contained auditory world. The true marvel of the jur, however, lies in its mobility. Imagine the process the call comes to move. Within an hour, sometimes even less, the entire structure can be disassembled. The women of the camp, with practiced hands and generations of knowledge, are primarily responsible. They untie the ropes, carefully peel back the felt layers, collapse the wooden lattice, and gather the roof poles. All these components are then loaded onto carts, often pulled by oxen or camels, or even directly onto the backs of horses. The transformation is astonishing. A solid, warm home becomes a compact pile of materials, ready to embark on the next leg of the journey. And just as swiftly it can be re-erected at a new campsite, a circular haven blossoming on the open steppe. This isn't just a house, it is a philosophy, a way of life made manifest. The Jur embodies the spirit of the nomad, adaptable, resilient, self-sufficient, and always in harmony with the land. It provides shelter, warmth, and security, yet never ties its inhabitants down. It allows them to follow their herds, to seek new pastures, to move with the seasons. For the Mongol Empire, the Jur was more than a dwelling. It was the fundamental unit of their society, a mobile brick in the foundation of their vast, ever-shifting domain. Each Jur was a family, each cluster of Jurs a camp, each camp a part of the greater tribal structure. Together they formed a nation that could literally pack up and move swiftly and efficiently, a testament to an ingenuity born of necessity and deep understanding of their unique environment. You realize, looking at the simple elegance of its design, that this portable home was as crucial to their success as any horse or bow. Amidst the fierce reputation of the Mongol conquerors, there lies an unexpected truth, a policy that often baffled and sometimes even relieved those who found themselves under the shadow of the Great Khan: their approach to religion. Imagine you are a Christian merchant, a Muslim scholar, or a Buddhist monk, living in a city that has just been brought under Mongol rule. You anticipate the worst: forced conversion, destruction of your sacred sites, the suppression of your faith. But what you experience is something entirely different, something pragmatic, and for the era, remarkably tolerant. The Mongols at their core were shamanists, revering the eternal blue sky, Tengri, and the spirits of the earth. But their practical outlook on governance meant that they understood a crucial lesson: a people secure in their faith are less likely to rebel. So, as long as you were not actively resisting their rule, as long as you paid your taxes and did not conspire against the Khan, you were free to worship as you pleased. This wasn't benevolence in the modern sense. It was a cold, calculated strategy for stability. Picture a bustling street in Karakoram, the Mongol capital. You might hear the call to prayer from a newly built mosque mingling with the distant chiming of bells from a Christian church, and perhaps the chanting from a Buddhist temple, all existing side by side, their adherents moving freely, engaging in commerce, perhaps even discussing their theological differences without fear of persecution. There is a palpable sense of a melting pot of diverse beliefs coexisting under a singular, overarching authority that simply didn't care about the details of your salvation, only about your obedience. The great Khans themselves, rather than imposing their own beliefs, often displayed a curious intellectual openness. Imagine being invited to the Khan's court, a space that might be a grandeur or a more permanent structure, adorned with silks and felt hangings. You, a scholar of your faith, find yourself amidst other religious leaders, a Nestorian Christian bishop, a Muslim imam, a Buddhist lama, perhaps even a Taoist master. The Khan, a figure of immense power, sits listening, his expression unreadable, as these learned individuals engage in theological debates. He might ask questions, seemingly genuinely curious, weighing their arguments, comparing their philosophies. This wasn't about finding a true religion for himself, but about understanding the different spiritual frameworks that motivated his diverse subjects. It was about gathering knowledge, about showing respect, or at least tolerance to powerful religious institutions, and perhaps even about subtly reinforcing his own divinely ordained authority by appearing as a supreme arbiter, a universal leader above all particular faiths. You might feel a strange mix of apprehension and exhilaration as you explain the tenets of your belief system to the very ruler who holds your life and the life of your community in his hands. This pragmatic religious inclusivity stood in stark contrast to many contemporary empires, where religious conformity was often enforced with an iron fist. It meant that skilled artisans, valuable merchants, and knowledgeable scholars from various religious backgrounds were willing to settle in Mongol, controlled territories, bringing their talents and contributing to the empire's economic and cultural life. It fostered a unique environment where intellectual and spiritual exchanges, often suppressed elsewhere, could flourish. The smell of incense from a Buddhist altar, the tang of oil from a Christian lamp, the clear air after a Muslim prayer, all were tolerated. All were part of the vast, intricate tapestry woven by the Mongol Empire. This unexpected freedom, born not of enlightenment but of practical governance, allowed the seeds of countless faiths to continue to grow, even in the shadow of the conquering horde. Before the dust settled on the endless steppe, before the world truly knew the name Mongol, there was the Khwarezmian Empire. Imagine, if you will, a jewel-studded crown glittering under the desert sun, stretching from the Caspian Sea deep into Central Asia, a vast realm of bustling cities, learned scholars, and immense wealth. Its Shah, Muhammad II, viewed his dominion as the zenith of civilization, his armies a formidable wall against any barbarian intrusion. Genghis Khan, master of the unified tribes, looked west towards this mighty empire, not initially with the glint of conquest in his eye, but with the pragmatic vision of a burgeoning empire seeking to expand its reach through trade. He understood that even the mightiest warriors needed goods, needed resources, and a thriving exchange across the vast distances would only strengthen his nascent realm. So, in the year 1218, a grand caravan set forth from the Mongol lands, a sprawling serpentine of camels laden with precious furs, silks, and silver, escorted by hundreds of Mongol merchants. It was more than just a trading expedition. It was an olive branch, a diplomatic overture signaling the Khan's desire for peaceful commerce, a testament to his belief in the shared benefits of an open road. For the Mongols, trade was a sacred pact protected by ancient customs, and the safety of merchants was paramount, a guarantee enforced by the chilling reputation of Genghis Khan himself. This caravan was a test, a bridge, a silent promise of future prosperity, if only the Khwarezmian Shah would meet it halfway. The journey was long, arduous, a testament to the sheer scale of the known world, each step a testament to human endurance and enterprise. Finally, it arrived at Otrar, a strategically vital Khwarezmian city, its gates a bustling nexus of trade and travelers. Here, the caravan met its tragic end. The city's governor, a man named Inalchuk, was known for his insatiable greed and a suspicious nature that bordered on paranoia. whether blinded by the shimmering wealth of the Mongol goods, or genuinely believing the merchants to be spies. A claim utterly unfounded by history. He made a decision that would unravel an empire. He seized the entire caravan, all its goods, all its men, then, in an act of staggering barbarity, ordered the execution of every single Mongol merchant. Not one was spared. The silver was melted, the silks were taken, the furs distributed, and the bodies left to rot. It was an insult of cosmic proportions, a direct challenge to the very foundation of Mongol honor, and a fundamental breach of every known code of conduct between nations. When news of the massacre reached Genghis Khan, it was said that he withdrew into solitude, climbed a sacred mountain, and spent 3 days and nights in silent communion with Tengri, the eternal blue sky. This was not merely a diplomatic incident. It was a profound violation of trust, an affront to his person, and a sacred duty to avenge the innocent. He sent 3 envoys, 1 Muslim, 2 Mongols, to Khwarezm, demanding justice, the immediate surrender of Inalchuk. Shah Muhammad II, however, was as arrogant as he was short-sighted. He had the Muslim envoy beheaded and sent the 2 Mongols back with their beards shaved off, a public humiliation designed to brand them as slaves. This was a direct, unambiguous declaration of war, an act of such profound disdain that it left no room for negotiation, no path for peace. And so, the quiet murmur of trade routes transformed into the thunder of hooves. What followed was not merely a military campaign, but a cataclysm, a world war launched by a deeply wronged man and his unified people. Genghis Khan mustered the full might of his army, an army that now bore the weight of collective grievance, fueled by a searing desire for retribution. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire was absolute, relentless, and systematic. City after city, from Bukhara to Samarkand, Urgench to Merv, fell to the Mongol onslaught, often after fierce resistance, but always to the same chilling end. The land, once rich and fertile, was scoured clean, its cities reduced to dust and ash, its people scattered or put to the sword. Rivers were diverted, irrigation systems, centuries in the making, were destroyed, turning verdant plains into barren deserts. This wasn't just conquest, it was the chilling embodiment of vengeance, a brutal, unforgettable lesson for any who dared to slight the Khan or disregard the sacred tenets of the Mongol way. The world watched, aghast, as an entire civilization was swept away, a testament to the terrifying consequences of crossing the Khan, and a stark reminder that some debts could only be paid in blood. The Mongols, masters of the open steppe, riders born to the saddle, initially found themselves facing a challenge entirely alien to their nomadic heritage: the formidable stone walls of settled civilizations. Imagine, if you will, the broad, flat plains stretching to the horizon, the only barrier a distant mountain range or the winding course of a river. Their battles were fluid, dynamic, fought with the speed of the wind and the precision of the horse archer. But cities, these unmoving bastions of stone and mortar, were a different beast entirely. Early Mongol attempts at siege warfare could be costly, even clumsy. They might try to starve a city out, a long and arduous process, or simply ride around it, dismissing it as an irrelevant obstacle. Yet, the ambition of Genghis Khan, the sheer scope of his vision, demanded that no obstacle, however imposing, remain unconquered. He recognized with brutal pragmatism that to truly build an empire that spanned the known world, He needed to master the art of breaking down walls, of bringing fortified cities to their knees. And this is where the terrifying genius of the Mongols truly shone, their unparalleled capacity for learning and adaptation. They didn't invent the catapult or the trebuchet, the battering ram or the siege tower. Those were tools of ancient empires, refined over millennia by the very civilizations they were now confronting. But the Mongols possessed an insatiable hunger for knowledge, a ruthless efficiency in acquiring it, and an astonishing ability to apply it on an unprecedented scale. They were, in essence, the ultimate military pragmatists. When a city fell, the first priority after the initial devastation was not simply to plunder. It was to identify, capture, and conscript its skilled artisans, its engineers, its architects, its master craftsmen. Imagine the terror of being a stone mason, a carpenter, a metal worker, or an inventor, suddenly finding yourself in the hands of the very barbarians who had just shattered your world. These were not just nameless captives, they were invaluable resources, living repositories of knowledge essential for the Mongol war machine. They were offered a stark choice: serve the Khan, build his weapons, or face the consequences. And so, a vast, multinational, unwilling corps of engineers was formed. These men, drawn from across Persia, China, and Central Asia, were forced to turn their genius against their own people, against the very defenses they might once have helped to construct. Under the watchful eyes of Mongol overseers, they were tasked with building bigger, stronger, more efficient siege engines. They taught their Mongol masters how to calculate trajectories, how to fell the largest trees for massive trebuchet arms, how to forge stronger iron for battering ram heads, how to construct massive siege towers that could scale the highest walls. The Mongols themselves, ever quick learners, would absorb these techniques, supervise the construction, and relentlessly drive the pace of innovation. Suddenly, a Mongol army approaching a city was no longer just a horde of horsemen. It was an advancing industrial complex. Forests would vanish, transformed into the skeletons of siege towers and the massive beams of trebuchets. Rivers would be diverted, not just to deprive a city of water, but sometimes to flood its foundations, weakening its walls. Whole villages might be dismantled, their wood and stone repurposed for the war effort. The sound of a Mongol siege was no longer just the thud of hooves and the twang of bowstrings. It was the groaning of stressed timber, the creaking of ropes, the crashing impact of massive stones hurled with terrifying force, the rhythmic beat of battering rams pulverizing stone. Consider the Huihui Pao, or Muslim trebuchet, a testament to this terrifying synthesis of conquest and innovation. These were not simple machines. They were sophisticated counterweight trebuchets, far more powerful than the traction-powered catapults, common in many parts of the world at the time. They could hurl massive stones, incendiary devices, and even pots of Greek fire with devastating accuracy and range. You might be a citizen within a besieged city, watching in horror as these monstrous machines, assembled with incredible speed and precision, appeared seemingly overnight outside your walls. One day, the horizon is clear. The next, a forest of siege engines looms, their arms slowly drawing back, a silent promise of impending destruction. The Mongols also employed psychological warfare with chilling effectiveness. They would use captured populations as human shields, driving them ahead of the army to fill moats, to clear paths, or to simply demoralize the defenders by showing the sheer, overwhelming numbers. They learned how to undermine walls, digging tunnels beneath fortifications to cause them to collapse. They became adept at fire warfare, raining down flaming projectiles that could engulf entire sections of a city in a terrifying inferno. What started as a weakness for the nomadic people became, through ruthless assimilation and rapid learning, one of their most devastating strengths. They mastered the art of urban destruction with a speed and efficiency that left even the most hardened defenders in disbelief, often using the very ingenuity of the conquered to pave the way for further conquests. A grim testament to their terrifying and adaptive military mind. Before the Yasa, there was chaos. Imagine, if you will, the sprawling, windswept steppes of Mongolia, a landscape as beautiful as it was brutal. For centuries, this land was home to a multitude of nomadic tribes, each fiercely independent, constantly vying for grazing lands, for horses, for prestige. Life was a relentless cycle of raids, blood feuds, and shifting alliances. Loyalty was often fleeting, dictated by immediate necessity and the charisma of the strongest leader. Stealing cattle was a badge of honor, kidnapping women a common practice, and tribal warfare an almost constant backdrop to daily existence. There was no overarching law, no unified system of justice, beyond the immediate customs of a particular clan and the brutal force of retaliation. Into this maelstrom of disunity emerged Temujin, the man who would become Genghis Khan. He understood, perhaps more acutely than anyone before him, that to forge a lasting empire from such disparate, often antagonistic elements, he needed more than just military might. He needed order. He needed a shared identity, a common purpose, a discipline that transcended tribal loyalties. He needed a bedrock of law, and so he embarked on the monumental task of codifying the ancient customs of the steppe, combining them with his own revolutionary insights to create the Yasa, his iron law. The Yasa was, in many ways, a profound social contract, transforming a collection of warring clans into a disciplined, cohesive nation, a singular, unstoppable force. It wasn't merely a set of rules. It was the very blueprint for Mongol society, a radical reimagining of how people should live, fight, and govern. While some aspects were written down, particularly those dealing with official decrees and tax matters, much of the Yasa was transmitted orally, memorized by senior officials and judges, its precise wording often shrouded in a deliberate mystique. This secrecy lent it an almost sacred, inviolable authority, making it appear as if it flowed directly from the will of Tengri, the eternal blue sky. Let us consider some of its core tenets, each a profound insight into the Mongol way of life, each designed to foster unity, efficiency, and survival. Firstly, and perhaps surprisingly for a people often perceived as primitive, the Yasa dictated an almost sacred respect for water. It was strictly forbidden to urinate or wash in running water rivers, streams, lakes. Imagine for a moment the vast, arid steppe, where clean water sources are precious oases, essential for both humans and their invaluable livestock. This wasn't merely a spiritual injunction, though the Mongols certainly revered nature. It was a pragmatic public health measure, preventing the spread of disease and ensuring the continued purity of vital resources. To pollute a water source was a grave offense, an act against the entire community, a direct threat to survival. You might be a weary traveler, attempted to quench your thirst and clean your hands in a cool stream, but the Yasa would remind you, through generations of ingrained custom, that such a convenience could carry a death sentence. Then there was the absolute insistence on honesty and loyalty. Lying, particularly in matters of trade or military intelligence, was severely punished, often with death. Imagine a vast empire built on trust, where a merchant's word was his bond, where a soldier's report was gospel. This fostered a climate of reliability that made the complex logistics of a global empire possible. Theft, especially of livestock, was also a capital offense. In a nomadic society, where horses and herds represented wealth, sustenance, and military power, such crimes were seen as existential threats. The Yasa made it clear your property, however modest, was protected by the full might of the Khan's law. Military discipline was paramount, an unshakable pillar of the Yasa. Desertion in battle was met with immediate execution, not just for the individual but often for his entire Thavanarban, his squad of 10. This fostered an incredible sense of mutual responsibility, forging individuals into an unbreakable collective. You knew that your life and the lives of your comrades depended on the unwavering courage and loyalty of the man next to you. Insubordination, challenging a superior, or failing to follow orders, these were not minor infractions but acts of treason against the very structure of the empire. This iron discipline transformed a loose confederation of fierce, independent warriors into the most formidable, perfectly synchronized military machine the world had ever seen. The Yasa also contained surprisingly progressive elements for its time, particularly regarding religious tolerance. Genghis Khan, while deeply spiritual and often communicating with shamans, understood the practical necessity of allowing conquered peoples to practice their own faiths. Imagine arriving in a newly conquered city, expecting the destruction of your mosque, church, or temple, only to find the Mongols declaring that all religions were equal under the eternal blue sky. This pragmatic approach prevented widespread rebellions fueled by religious oppression and allowed the vast, diverse empire to function more smoothly. As long as you paid your taxes and did not resist the Khan's authority, your god was your own. Hospitality was also enshrined in the Yasa, a deep-seated tradition of the steppe. To refuse a guest shelter, food, or drink was a grave social transgression. Sharing was not merely an act of kindness but a fundamental social obligation, especially in a harsh environment where mutual aid was often the difference between life and death. The Yasa even extended to seemingly trivial matters, like the division of spoils after a battle or the proper etiquette at a feast. Everything was regulated. Everything had its place, designed to minimize friction and maximize efficiency within the rapidly expanding empire. The enforcement of the Yasa was swift and uncompromising. There were no elaborate trials, no lengthy appeals. Justice was dispensed with brutal efficiency, often by local chiefs or military commanders, with severe punishments for any transgression. This fear of immediate and absolute justice, coupled with the profound sense of order it created, was instrumental in uniting the disparate Mongol tribes. It replaced the endless cycle of blood feuds with a universal code, making all men from the humblest shepherd to the highest general subject to the same strictures under the Khan. The Yasa was more than just a legal code. It was the very soul of the Mongol Empire. It solidified Genghis Khan's authority, transforming a collection of raiders into a disciplined, purposeful state. It provided the structure, the rules, and the shared understanding that allowed the Mongol war machine to function with terrifying precision. It instilled a sense of common identity, molding Mongols, not just as a tribe, but as a people united by a shared law, a shared destiny, and an unshakable discipline that would shake the foundations of the world. You lived under the Yasa, and the Yasa, in turn, defined your entire existence. The wind, a constant, unseen companion across the vast steppes, often whispered secrets of the land, secrets the Mongols held dear. For a people whose lives were utterly intertwined with the rhythm of nature, their understanding and reverence for the natural world ran deeper than mere survival. It was a sacred pact. While the battlefield might have witnessed their unparalleled ferocity, their daily existence was governed by a profound, almost spiritual environmentalism. They believed in Tengri, the eternal blue sky, and in the Earth Mother, Etigen. These weren't abstract deities. They were living forces, ever present, demanding respect and balance. And nowhere was this reverence more evident than in their interaction with the most fundamental elements, water and fire. Consider water, the lifeblood of the arid steppe. A pristine spring, a flowing river, a vast lake Fornat. These were not just resources. They were sacred spaces imbued with spirits. For a Mongol, to pollute these vital sources was not merely unhygienic. It was an act of profound disrespect, an offense against the very spirits that sustained life. Thus, strict taboos governed their use of water. You would never wash your clothes in a river, nor would you bathe in its flowing currents. The very thought was anathema, waste, dirt. Anything that might sully the purity of the water was kept far from its banks. Imagine the sun beating down, the dust clinging to your skin, the sweat stinging your eyes, and yet you resist the urge to simply plunge into the cool river. Instead, you might wash sparingly away from the main flow, perhaps with a small amount of collected water, ensuring no impurities returned to the sacred source. This wasn't a choice, it was an ingrained custom, passed down through generations, a silent agreement with the land itself. The murmuring brook, the tranquil lake, they were not just thirst quenchers, they were altars demanding a quiet, deferential approach. Fire, too, held a potent significance. The hearth in the yurt was the heart of the home, a source of warmth, a place for cooking, and a focal point for family gatherings. But it was also seen as a purifier, a connection to the heavens. You would never throw dirty water or refuse into the fire, nor would you step over it. Such actions would not only dishonor the fire spirit, but could also bring misfortune upon the entire family. The crackling flames were watched with a quiet awe, a powerful yet fickle ally. When traveling, campfires were carefully managed, never left unattended, and always extinguished thoroughly, not just for safety, but out of respect for the land that offered the wood. The earth itself was treated with similar veneration. Grave sites in particular were considered sacred and inviolable, to be disturbed by no one. The ground beneath their feet, the vast expanse of the grasslands, provided pasture for their herds, the very foundation of their existence. To needlessly scar it, to disrespect it, was unthinkable. Every action, from setting up a yurt to moving a herd, was guided by an understanding of the delicate balance of the steppe ecosystem. Their nomadic movements, seemingly random to an outsider, were often carefully calculated to allow pastures to recover, ensuring the long-term health of the land that fed them. This inherent environmentalism, born from a harsh and unforgiving landscape, created a paradoxical image, a people capable of unleashing unparalleled destruction in war, yet deeply attuned to the rhythms of life and preservation in peace. Their ruthlessness was reserved for their enemies, for those who threatened their way of life. But for the land, their ultimate provider, there was only a quiet, unwavering respect. It was a respect born not just of spiritual belief, but of absolute necessity, a hard-won wisdom from centuries of living precariously on the edge of survival. This deep-seated connection to nature, the subtle hum of the wind, the distant call of a wild horse, the gentle rustle of tall grasses, all contributed to a pervasive sense of belonging, a quiet understanding of their place within the grand design of the world. It was a life lived in constant dialogue with the elements, a profound lesson in interdependence whispered across the vast open spaces of their homeland. And in the quiet of the night, under the vast canopy of the stars, one could almost hear the land breathing, a silent reminder of the sacred bond. Now, imagine shifting your gaze from the endless plains, where the wind sings its ancient songs, to a burgeoning settlement, a place where the sounds of the world converged. This was Karakorum, the beating heart of the Mongol Empire. For those who pictured the Mongols as solely a people of scattered tents and perpetual movement, Karakorum presented a fascinating, almost bewildering contradiction. It was not merely a collection of yurts, though yurts certainly dotted the landscape around it. Karakorum was a burgeoning metropolis, a cosmopolitan hub that defied conventional expectations of a nomadic empire. Established by Genghis Khan, and later significantly expanded by his son Finshidi Khan, Karakorum blossomed into a true capital, a testament to the Mongols' surprising capacity for administration and their even more surprising openness to the world. Imagine approaching this city. You might expect a sprawling camp, but instead, you would encounter city walls, carefully constructed, embracing a mosaic of cultures and structures. Within these walls, a structured urban plan began to emerge. There were distinct districts, one for the imperial palace and its administrative buildings, another for artisans, and yet others for various ethnic and religious communities. The air in Karakorum was thick with the scent of diverse spices, the murmur of countless languages, and the rhythmic sounds of industry. Here, you could hear the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the gentle hum of silk weaving, and the bartering cries of merchants from lands as distant as Venice and as ancient as China. Artisans from Persia, goldsmiths from Hungary, weavers from Central Asia, all found a home and a purpose within these walls, contributing their skills to the growing empire. This was a place where different worlds didn't just meet, they lived side by side, creating a vibrant, dynamic tapestry of humanity. One of the most striking features of Karakorum, and a profound illustration of Mongol pragmatism, was its religious diversity. Walking through its streets, you wouldn't find a single dominant faith. Instead, your eyes might fall upon a towering mosque, its minaret reaching towards the sky, just a short distance from a Christian church, perhaps a Nestorian one, adorned with crosses. And nearby, the gentle bells of a Buddhist temple might chime in the wind, accompanied by the quiet reverence of its devotees. Mongol Khans, remarkably, adopted a policy of broad religious tolerance. They understood that a stable empire required the cooperation of its diverse peoples, and suppressing their beliefs was counterproductive. As long as subjects paid their taxes and remained loyal, their spiritual practices were largely their own affair. Indeed, the Khans themselves were known to engage with religious leaders from various faiths. They would invite Christian priests, Muslim imams, Buddhist lamas, and even Taoist masters to their courts, listening intently to their doctrines, perhaps hoping to find some universal truth, or simply to gain a better understanding of the peoples they governed. This wasn't necessarily a sign of deep personal conviction in any one faith, but rather a sophisticated, pragmatic approach to imperial governance. It fostered an atmosphere of intellectual curiosity and, crucially, reduced internal religious strife. Economically, Karakoram was a vital nexus of the Silk Road. Goods flowed in from the east Tavant silks porcelain, spices Tavant tea, and from the west Tavant furs, wool, and metalwork. Merchants, protected by the Pax Mongolica, traveled with unprecedented safety across the vast distances of the empire, bringing their wares and their cultures to this central hub. The sheer volume and variety of goods traded here reflected the immense reach and influence of the Mongol dominion. Imagine yourself as a visitor, perhaps a Venetian merchant or a Persian scholar, arriving in Karakoram. The initial shock of seeing such a sophisticated urban center, built by a people often dismissed as barbarians, would quickly give way to wonder. You would witness a thriving bazaar, filled with exotic wares and the chatter of a dozen tongues. You might share a meal in a bustling caravanserai, exchanging stories with fellow travelers. You could marvel at the engineering of the city's water supply or the craftsmanship of its artisans. Karakoram was a living testament to the Mongol Empire's unexpected role not just as a conqueror, but as a facilitator of global exchange, a melting pot where the disparate threads of the known world were woven together, however briefly, into a single, vibrant fabric. It was a place where the world truly became, for the first time, interconnected, a grand stage for the mingling of diverse human experiences. Yet, even in the bustling heart of Karakoram, or across the furthest reaches of the Pax Mongolica, the seeds of future discord were being sown. The magnificent empire, forged by the sheer will and genius of Genghis Khan, was destined, like all great empires, to confront the challenges of succession and the corrosive power of ambition. While Genghis Khan had provided a framework for his vast dominion, establishing a rudimentary legal code known as the Yasa and organizing his military with unparalleled efficiency, the question of long-term succession for such an enormous, unprecedented territory proved to be a formidable, ultimately insurmountable, hurdle. Upon his death in 1227, Genghis Khan had already begun the process of dividing his empire amongst his 4 surviving sons, and by custom providing appanages or territories for other prominent family members. This was meant to preserve the unity of the Golden Family, or Altan Urag, but it inadvertently laid the groundwork for future fragmentation. The eldest son, Jochi, had died before his father, but his sons inherited the westernmost territories, forming what would become the Golden Horde. Chagatai received Central Asia, forming the Chagatai Khanate. Fornjedi, the third son, was designated the Great Khan, holding the central lands and the imperial capital, Karakoram. And Talawi, the youngest, received the ancestral lands in Mongolia. Initially, under Fujedi, the empire remained largely unified, bound by the memory of its founder and the continued momentum of conquest. Yet, the sheer scale of the conquests stretching from Eastern Europe to China, meant that the various khanates were soon exposed to vastly different cultural, religious, and political influences. The Golden Horde, ruling over Slavic peoples, absorbed different customs. The Ilkhanate, established later by Ptolemy's son Hochlag in Persia and the Middle East, found itself deeply immersed in Islamic civilization. The Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, another grandson of Genghis Khan in China, embraced Chinese administrative traditions and settled into an agrarian society. Each khanate, though nominally part of the larger Mongol Empire, began to develop its own distinct character, driven by the unique circumstances of its conquered lands. The internal struggles often centered around two core issues: succession to the title of Great Khan and control over resources and territories. When a Great Khan died, the succession was rarely smooth. The Kurultai, a grand assembly of Mongol nobles, was supposed to elect the new Great Khan, but these elections were often fraught with political maneuvering, power struggles, and even open warfare. Each branch of the Golden family believed it had a legitimate claim, and as distances grew and cultural divergences deepened, the bonds of kinship began to fray. For example, the disputes between the descendants of Jochi and Chagatai, and later between the various branches of the Tului line, were constant. They squabbled over pasture lands, trade routes, and spheres of influence. These weren't just petty squabbles, they were conflicts that involved vast armies and led to significant bloodshed, weakening the overall imperial structure. The vastness of the empire, once its greatest strength, became its greatest vulnerability. Messages and orders took months to travel from Karakoram to the fringes of the empire, making centralized control increasingly difficult. The rulers of the distant khanates, surrounded by their own subjects and facing their own local challenges, inevitably developed their own independent agendas. Economic interests further exacerbated these divisions. Control over rich agricultural lands, lucrative trade routes, or bustling cities became points of contention. The wealth generated in one khanate might be seen as rightfully belonging to the whole, or to a rival branch of the family. Religious differences, too, played an increasingly significant role. While the early Mongols were largely shamanistic and tolerant, over time, the various khanates began to adopt the religions of their subjects. The Ilkhanate and the Golden Horde largely converted to Islam, while the Yuan court in China leaned towards Buddhism. These religious shifts created new lines of division, sometimes pitting Muslim Mongols against their Buddhist or shamanist kin. The Golden family, once a symbol of unbreakable unity and shared purpose under Genghis Khan, gradually became a source of internal fragmentation. The ruthless drive that had united the steppe tribes and conquered half the known world turned inward, consuming itself in internecine conflict. The empire didn't collapse overnight. Rather, it slowly fractured like a magnificent ancient vase developing hairline cracks, each one a testament to the irresistible forces of distance, ambition, and cultural assimilation. By the late 13th and early 14th centuries, the vision of a single, unified Mongol Empire had largely faded, replaced by independent, often rivalrous, khanates. The greatest conquerors the world had ever known, who had overcome every external foe, ultimately found their most intractable enemy within the very heart of their own bloodline. The relentless spirit of conquest, when turned inward, became the very undoing of the empire's grand design, leaving behind a legacy of power, influence, and the quiet, inevitable decay that follows the peak of any great power. Imagine for a moment, you are standing on the vast, treeless steppe. The wind whips around you, carrying the scent of wild herbs and distant horses. Above, the sky stretches out, an endless dome of shifting blues and grays, sometimes pierced by the blinding sun, sometimes veiled by soft, scudding clouds. This immense, overarching presence is what the Mongols called Tengri Fondi, the eternal blue sky. For the nomadic peoples of the steppe, the sky was not just a ceiling to their world. It was the world itself, the ultimate source of power, destiny, and judgment. They lived under its gaze, reliant on its whims for rain, for fair weather, for the very survival of their herds. Every sunrise was a promise, every storm a reminder of its immense power. You feel small yet connected, a tiny thread in a vast living tapestry woven by the elements. This wasn't a god confined to temples or rituals performed within four walls. Tengri was everywhere. It infused the air you breathed, the ground you rode on, the very spirit of the wind that carried whispers across the endless plains. There were no elaborate priestly castes or complex theological texts. The connection was direct, intuitive, and deeply personal, yet universally understood by all who lived under that vast, open canopy. To the Mongols, Tengri was the supreme being, the cosmic order, the silent force that dictated the rise and fall of nations and the fate of every individual. It was a paternal, yet often distant, deity whose will was manifested in the natural world and in the unfolding of human events. They believed Tengri chose their leaders, empowered their khans, and ultimately sanctioned their conquests. When Genghis Khan unified the disparate tribes, transforming a collection of warring clans into an unstoppable force, he did so under the banner of Tengri. He claimed that the eternal blue sky itself had granted him the mandate, the Forti Tarki Jalik, to bring the world under a single rule, Thorti, the rule of the Mongols. This wasn't merely a political claim. It was a profound spiritual conviction that resonated deep within every Mongol heart. Think of it, to believe that the very sky above you, the source of all life and destiny, has chosen Chun, your leader, for your people, for a monumental task. It instilled an unshakable confidence, a divine purpose that fueled their extraordinary ambition and resilience. It transformed ruthless raiding into a sacred mission, a divine right to conquer. Every victory on the battlefield was seen as confirmation of Tengri's favor. Every setback, a test of their faith or a sign that they had somehow displeased the sky. Before any major undertaking, before a battle, before a tribal council, prayers and offerings would be made to Tengri. Often these were simple gestures, a raised cup of mare's milk, a whispered plea, a moment of silent reverence under the open sky. Even the very act of conquest, which might seem purely pragmatic or opportunistic to an outsider, was infused with this spiritual conviction. They weren't just taking land or treasure, they were fulfilling a cosmic duty, bringing order to a chaotic world as ordained by the eternal blue sky. This provided an immense psychological advantage, a sense of invincibility born not from arrogance, but from a profound belief in their own divine mandate. Their shamans, the Forti Baizine, served as intermediaries, interpreting the signs, performing rituals, and ensuring the community remained in harmony with Tengri and the spirits of the land. These were not elaborate ceremonies held in grand temples, but often intimate gatherings around a fire, under the stars, or in the stillness of a yurt, connecting with the unseen forces that governed their existence. The concept of fate or destiny was intrinsically linked to Tengri. What was meant to be would be guided by the unseen hand of the sky. This fatalism, far from making them passive, made them incredibly resolute. If Tengri had willed it, then it was their duty to pursue it with every fiber of their being. There was no point in questioning, only in acting. The vastness of the steppe, the relentless cycle of seasons, the stark beauty of the natural world, Fendi, all of it reinforced the omnipresence and omnipotence of Tengri. When you sleep tonight, perhaps glance out at the night sky, no matter how distant it seems through city lights, and imagine a world where that vastness was the very definition of the divine, a silent, powerful guardian watching over every step, every breath. This belief system, simple yet profound, provided the moral and spiritual bedrock for one of the most transformative empires in human history. It gave meaning to their struggles, purpose to their conquests, and an enduring identity to a people forged in the crucible of the endless steppe, forever looking up to the limitless blue. Now, let's turn our gaze from the sublime expanse of the sky to the more earthly, and sometimes rougher, aspects of Mongol life. Imagine a gathering after a long day's ride. The fire crackling, the aroma of roasted meat filling the air, and the low hum of conversation gradually rising into robust laughter. The Mongols, for all their fearsome reputation on the battlefield, were not without their own distinct sense of humor. It was a humor, much like the steppe itself, that was direct, unvarnished, and often quite practical. Their humor wasn't subtle or ironic in the ways we might understand it today. It was the humor of survival, of shared hardship, and of plain-spoken observation. Think of a group of riders, dusty from the trail, sharing stories of a stubborn horse, a clumsy fall, or the antics of a particularly spirited goat. The laughter would be hearty, unrestrained, a release valve for the relentless demands of their nomadic existence. Wrestling, for instance, was not just a sport. It was a form of communal entertainment and a display of strength, often punctuated by a raw, boisterous humor. Imagine two powerful men grappling in the dirt, straining and grunting, surrounded by cheering, jeering onlookers. A particularly skillful move, or an unexpectedly awkward fall, would draw roars of approval and laughter, often accompanied by playful insults or challenges. It was a physical, almost theatrical comedy, where the stakes were pride and bragging rights, not life or death. Their jokes often revolved around the realities of their lives, the difficulties of herding, the quirks of their animals, or the predictable failings of their enemies. There might be tales of a warrior, so brave he mistook a bear for a sheep, or a chieftain, so proud he fell off his horse trying to impress a visiting dignitary. These weren't malicious tales, necessarily, but rather a way of bonding, of sharing common experiences, and of gently or not so gently poking fun at the human condition. Sometimes their humor could feel harsh to modern ears, reflecting a world where life was cheap and consequences were immediate. A joke about an enemy's weakness or a rival tribe's misfortune might seem cruel, but in their context, it was a way of solidifying group identity, of reinforcing allegiances, and even of mentally preparing for conflict. It was part of the psychological armor, a way to laugh in the face of danger or adversity. At feasts, especially those following a successful hunt or a peaceful resolution of a tribal dispute, the atmosphere would be lively. Bards would sing epic poems, and storytellers would recount sagas of heroes and villains, often embellishing them with humorous twists. Imagine a grizzled warrior, his face etched with sun and wind, leaning back from the fire, sharing a tale of a particularly foolish scout who mistook a mirage for a vast enemy army, causing a whole detachment to gallop off in pursuit of nothing but shimmering heat. The laughter would echo across the steppe, cleansing the air, binding the community. They had a directness that could be amusing in its bluntness. If someone was boastful, they might be met with a dry, understated retort that cut right to the core of their pretension. If someone failed miserably at a task, the immediate public acknowledgement of that failure might be softened with a joke, reminding everyone that even the greatest warriors sometimes tripped over their own feet. Consider the role of the Fenni-Item festivals, a convergence of wrestling, horse racing, and archery. These were not merely competitions but grand social events, infused with a festive competitive spirit. The banter, the boasts, the playful challenges, all contributed to a lively atmosphere where humor was a lubricant for social interaction, a way to test boundaries, and a means to express individuality within the collective. Even their military strategies sometimes had an almost grimly humorous element, especially when viewed from the perspective of their bewildered enemies. The feigned retreat, for example, Thindy tactic, we'll discuss later, might seem like a straightforward military maneuver, but imagine the frustrated glee of the Mongol riders, drawing their overconfident pursuers into a trap, knowing full well the irony of the situation. There is a certain dark humor in luring an opponent to their doom with their own hubris. Their proverbs and sayings also reveal this earthy wit. They often used animal metaphors, reflecting their deep connection to the natural world. A slow person might be compared to a snail crossing the steppe, a foolish one to a sheep that wanders too far from the flock. These were not abstract pronouncements, but vivid, immediate images that conjured a smile or a knowing nod. So, when you picture the Mongol warrior, do not imagine a perpetually grim figure. Imagine him too capable of a full-throated laugh, sharing a joke around the fire, his eyes crinkling at the corners. His humor was a reflection of his world, tough, direct, resilient, and utterly without pretense. It was the sound of a people who knew how to live and how to laugh in a world that often offered little comfort. Now, let's explore one of the most profound and perhaps surprising legacies of the Mongol Empire, a period of relative peace and unprecedented connectivity that emerged directly from their vast and often brutal conquests. This era is known to historians as the 40 Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace. It was a paradox, a time when the very forces that brought such devastation also laid the groundwork for an astonishing blossoming of trade, travel, and cultural exchange across the entire Eurasian continent. Imagine for a moment, you are a merchant in the early 13th century, perhaps from Venice or Genoa, or perhaps from Persia or China, before the Mongols. Your journey across vast distances would have been fraught with peril. Bandits lurked in every pass. Local warlords demanded exorbitant tolls, and different kingdoms meant endless border crossings, each with its own bureaucracy and dangers. The Silk Roads were a patchwork of unreliable routes, frequently disrupted by conflict and insecurity. Then came the Mongols. Their conquests, though often devastating, swept away countless petty kingdoms, extinguished banditry with ruthless efficiency, and established a single, vast, unified political entity stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. Where there had once been 1,000 small conflicts, there was now one overarching authority, and that authority, once established, valued order and the free flow of goods. For the first time in centuries, if ever, it was possible for a single individual to travel from the farthest reaches of Europe all the way to China relatively unmolested. You could, quite literally, hold a finna paisa, a golden tablet or passport issued by the Mongol Khan Sudi, and traverse thousands of miles, knowing that the empire's formidable network of postal stations, known as Binyam, would provide you with fresh horses, food, and safe lodging. This was the medieval equivalent of having an all-access diplomatic pass for an entire continent. Consider the sheer scale of this. Imagine loading your camels with precious spices, silks, porcelain, or exotic furs in Beijing, and knowing that with the Sunni Paisa in your hand, you could journey across deserts, over towering mountains, through bustling cities, and into the heart of Europe, with an unprecedented degree of safety. The very soldiers who had once been instruments of destruction now served as guarantors of your safety, enforcing the Khan's law across the empire. This unprecedented security had a transformative effect. Trade flourished as never before. Goods flowed freely between East and West, bringing new luxuries and necessities to distant lands. Chinese silk found its way to European markets, while Persian carpets graced the homes of distant Asian rulers. Spices from India, furs from Siberia, precious stones from the Middle East all became more accessible, weaving a complex web of economic interdependence across a previously fractured world. But it wasn't just goods that traveled along these newly secured routes. Ideas, technologies, and cultures embarked on their own grand journeys. Chinese inventions, such as gunpowder, the compass, and printing techniques, made their way westward, dramatically altering the course of European history. Medical knowledge, astronomical observations, and mathematical advancements from the Islamic world also found new pathways into Europe and beyond. Christian missionaries traveled to the Mongol courts hoping to convert the Khans, bringing back fascinating accounts of distant lands. European travelers like Marco Polo, whose vivid descriptions of China captivated the Western world, were able to undertake their epic journeys precisely because of the stability provided by the Tinpax Mongolica. Imagine his quiet wonder as he traveled through lands previously unknown to his countrymen, his mind absorbing the sights, sounds, and wonders of a world newly opened. Even the spread of artistic styles and architectural forms saw a dynamic exchange. Persian miniatures began to show influences from Chinese painting, while Islamic calligraphy found its way onto Mongol decrees. The very act of interaction, whether economic or diplomatic, fostered a new kind of cosmopolitanism, a blending of disparate traditions on a scale rarely seen before or since. The postal relay system, the Fayambine, which was primarily designed for rapid military communication, became a vital artery for this civilian traffic as well. At intervals of 20 to 30 miles, there were stations with fresh horses and supplies, ensuring that messages and travelers could move at extraordinary speed. Think of it as the original high-speed communication network, stretching across continents, facilitating the flow of information and people in a way that had been unimaginable before. This was a globalizing force, long before the term was even conceived. It created a world that was, in many ways, more interconnected than it would be again until the age of exploration, centuries later. The exchange of plants, agricultural techniques, and even diseases to a darker side effect we will touch upon subtly, was all facilitated by these newly established links. So, When you consider the Mongol Empire, remember not just the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel, but also the quiet tread of the merchant, the scholar, and the missionary moving with unprecedented freedom and safety across a vast continent. The Pax Mongolica was a testament to the unexpected consequences of monumental power, a period where destruction ironically paved the way for a vibrant, if temporary, era of peace and profound global exchange. It reminds us that history is often a tapestry woven with threads of both darkness and unexpected light. The year is 1346. You are far from the familiar, quiet hum of your own time, adrift in the distant echoes of a forgotten world. Tonight we drift towards a shadow that stretched across continents, a consequence unintended yet utterly transformative. We speak now of the devastating whisper carried on the wind, the silent passenger on the trade routes forged by the very empire we've explored. Imagine the bustling port city of Kaffa, nestled on the shores of the Black Sea. It is a Genoese trading post, a vibrant hub of exchange, where goods and people from east and west converged. The air is thick with the scent of spices, foreign fabrics, and the salty tang of the sea. Caravans arrive, laden with silks and porcelain, their drivers weary from the long journey across the vast steppes. Ships bob gently in the harbor, their sails furled, waiting to embark on voyages to distant European shores. But in this year, a different kind of cargo arrives at Kaffa's gates. The Golden Horde descendants of Genghis Khan lay siege to this vital port. For months, the city has defied their relentless assault, its high walls a stubborn barrier against the mounted warriors. Yet something new, something insidious, begins to plague the besiegers themselves. A sickness, swift and terrifying, sweeps through the Mongol camps. Warriors, once robust and fearsome, are now racked by fever, their bodies covered in gruesome swellings, blackening their skin. This is a disease, unlike any they have seen, a malevolent force that drains the life from men faster than any arrow. Desperate, perhaps in a fit of cruel genius, or simply as a grim act of psychological warfare, the Mongol commander, Johnny Beg, orders a horrifying new weapon to be deployed. Imagine the great siege engines, the massive trebuchets that once hurled rocks and flaming pitch against the city walls. Now they are loaded with a different kind of projectile. The bodies of those who succumbed to this dreadful plague are hoisted with a sickening thud into the enormous slings. Then, with a mighty groan of wood and rope, they are launched, arcing high over the walls of Kaffa, landing with a splash or a dull thud within the unsuspecting city. Picture the scene within Kaffa, the defenders, already fatigued by the long siege, suddenly witness this grotesque spectacle. Bodies contorted by disease raining down from the sky. The sheer horror, the psychological shock must have been overwhelming. The putrid smell of decaying flesh, now mingled with the stench of sickness, permeated the air. And with these ghastly projectiles came the invisible passengers, the fleas, tiny, persistent vectors of death, already carrying the deadly bacteria, and perhaps even the rats themselves, scurrying from the infected corpses, finding their way into the city's granaries and homes, carrying the blight further. The terror spreads like wildfire, not just the terror of the siege, but the terror of the unknown sickness. The Genoese defenders and residents, already weakened, begin to fall ill. The same black swellings appear on their bodies, the same fever consumes them. With their city under siege and now ravaged from within, escape becomes the only thought. Ships, once symbols of trade and connection, now become desperate vessels of flight. Imagine the hasty departure, ships cutting their moorings, sails hoisted, fleeing the doomed city. But they carry more than just terrified survivors. Deep within their holds, nestled among the cargo, or clinging to the very clothing of the desperate passengers, are the same tiny fleas, the same infected rats. The very trade routes, the grand network of connection that the Mongol Empire had so effectively secured and expanded, now served as superhighways for this invisible killer. From Kaffa, these ships sailed to Constantinople, the majestic capital of the Byzantine Empire. The city, a crossroads of the world, soon becomes another epicenter. Then the plague moves like an unstoppable tide, to Messina in Sicily, to Marseille in France, to Venice, Genoa, Pisa in Italy. The bustling ports, the arteries of trade, become the entry points for the Black Death into Europe. Imagine the quiet terror. You are a merchant, waiting for a ship from the east. It arrives perhaps a little late, perhaps with a crew looking too gaunt, too pale. You greet them, exchange pleasantries, unknowingly embrace the harbinger of your doom. The plague spreads from port cities inland, carried by travelers, by merchants, by pilgrims. It follows the roads, the rivers, the paths of human connection. This wasn't a deliberate act of genocide by the Mongols. Not in the way they strategically wiped out cities. It was an unforeseen, devastating consequence of their siege, magnified by the unprecedented connectivity their empire had forged. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, which allowed goods, ideas, and people to travel safely across vast distances, inadvertently created the perfect conditions for a global pandemic. Think of the irony. An empire built on conquest, on the movement of people and goods, on connecting disparate lands, ultimately facilitated the spread of a disease that would depopulate continents. The world, once fragmented, was now a single, vulnerable organism, susceptible to a single devastating affliction. This plague, known to history as the Black Death, would wipe out an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population, and untold millions more across Asia and Africa. It reshaped societies, economies, and beliefs, leaving an indelible mark on the course of human civilization, all tracing back, in part, to those grim projectiles launched over the walls of Kaffa. And so, we arrive at the profound and often contradictory legacy of the Mongol Empire, a legacy not just of destruction and conquest, but of unintended unification and transformation. The world before the Mongols was a tapestry of disparate kingdoms, empires, and nomadic groups, often isolated, rarely interacting on a grand scale. The Silk Road existed, yes, but it was fraught with peril, a broken chain of dangerous routes. The Mongols, through their ruthless efficiency and sheer scale of conquest, forged an unprecedented contiguous empire, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. Picture the vastness of this dominion, a single political entity, however loosely governed at its edges, that spanned nearly a quarter of the Earth's landmass. This was the largest land empire in history, and within this colossal realm they established a network of security and governance. This led to what historians call the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace. Imagine now a traveler, Perhaps a Venetian merchant like Marco Polo, or a Franciscan friar seeking converts, or an Islamic scholar. With a fordiasa, a golden tablet of authority issued by the Great Khan, they could journey safely across thousands of miles. No longer were they endlessly waylaid by local bandits or suspicious rulers. The Mongol law, the yasa, held sway, ensuring a degree of order. This unprecedented safety facilitated an explosion of trade. Goods that once were rare luxuries in one part of the world became more accessible. Chinese silks, porcelain, and gunpowder flowed westward. Spices from India and Southeast Asia traveled to Europe. European wool, timber, and silver moved eastward. Imagine the marketplaces in cities like Samarkand or Tabriz, a dizzying array of tongues, currencies, and exotic wares, all converging under the distant, yet firm, shadow of the Mongol Khan. But it wasn't just physical goods that traveled. Ideas, technologies, and innovations, previously confined to their regions of origin, now crisscrossed the supercontinent. Consider gunpowder. Invented in China centuries earlier, its destructive potential was amplified and disseminated westward by the Mongols. They adapted and improved Chinese siege weapons, including cannons, which then spread to the Middle East and eventually to Europe, fundamentally changing the nature of warfare. Printing technology, the compass, even rudimentary forms of paper money formed, all Chinese inventions that found new pathways to Europe during the Mongol era. Imagine a quiet scribe in a European monastery, poring over a new manuscript describing the construction of a printing press, an idea that would revolutionize literacy and learning, or a European navigator gazing at a magnetic compass, charting a course across unknown waters, something that would lead to the age of exploration. The Mongols also shattered existing political structures, clearing the ground for new ones to emerge. In Russia, centuries of disparate princedoms were consolidated under the heavy hand of Mongol rule. When the Golden Horde eventually weakened, the groundwork was laid for the rise of Moscow as a dominant power, uniting the fragmented Russian states into a single empire. In the Islamic world, the Abbasid Caliphate, a spiritual and political center for centuries, was brutally destroyed by Hulagu Khan's invasion of Baghdad in 1258. This act, while devastating, also led to a decentralization of power, allowing new Islamic dynasties and empires to rise, most notably the Ottoman Empire, which would go on to shape the next several centuries of global history. And perhaps, most fascinatingly, the Mongol conquests inadvertently sparked the European age of exploration. The safety of the Silk Road, while beneficial, was also volatile. As the Mongol Empire began to fragment anew, often less tolerant, powers rose in its wake. The land routes became dangerous once more. European merchants, now accustomed to the luxuries and spices of the East, desperately sought alternative ways to reach these coveted markets. This pressing need, this hunger for direct access to the wealth of Asia, directly motivated explorers like Columbus and Vasco da Gama to seek sea routes to the east, leading to the discovery of the Americas and the circumnavigation of Africa. So, the Mongols, through their sheer force and the vastness of their reach, did not just conquer, they connected. They were a destructive force that paradoxically laid the groundwork for a more interconnected world. They reshaped the political map, disseminated technology, and indirectly spurred the very voyages that would one day overshadow their own land-based empire. Their legacy is a complex tapestry of devastation and unexpected advancement, a testament to how even the most brutal conquests can set in motion unforeseen, world-altering changes. The world after the Mongols was irrevocably different, a truly globalized entity for better or worse. And now, we come to the final secret. The greatest mystery surrounding the legendary figure who set all these monumental forces in motion, Genghis Khan. The man who united the scattered Mongol tribes, forged the largest contiguous empire in history, and whose legacy we have gently explored tonight. His final resting place remains one of history's most enduring enigmas, a secret kept with a chilling precision that only the Mongols could achieve. Imagine the vast, silent plains of Mongolia stretching endlessly under a sky so immense, it feels almost sacred. This is the landscape that shaped Genghis Khan, the land he revered, and the land to which he ultimately returned. When he died in 1227, the instructions for his burial were absolute. No marker, no monument, no trace. His tomb was to be a secret, forever hidden from the gaze of men, a testament to his desire to be absorbed back into the eternal blue sky and the endless green earth from which he sprang. Picture the funeral procession, a solemn, silent journey across the steppe. According to tradition, as his body was carried to its unknown resting place, any person or animal encountered along the way was summarily executed. This was not merely an act of cruelty, but a chillingly effective method to ensure absolute secrecy, to prevent any witness from ever knowing the path the great Khan's final journey took. Their lives were sacrificed to preserve the ultimate mystery of their leader. Upon reaching the chosen location, the ritual of secrecy intensified. The ground was prepared, the burial chamber dug deep into the earth. It is said that tens of thousands of skilled craftsmen and soldiers were involved in this immense undertaking. But once the tomb was sealed, once Genghis Khan was laid to rest, the most brutal part of the secrecy protocol was enacted. All the individuals who had participated in the construction, those who knew the precise location, were themselves put to death. No witnesses, no potential betrayers. Their knowledge died with them, ensuring the secret would never be spoken. But the measures didn't end there. To erase any physical evidence of the burial site, a vast herd of horses, perhaps thousands of them, was then driven repeatedly over the freshly disturbed earth. Imagine the thunderous drumming of hooves, the ground shaking, as the earth was systematically churned and flattened, obliterating any sign of digging, any subtle mound or depression that might hint at a secret beneath. The earth was returned to its natural, undisturbed state, as if nothing had ever happened there. And finally, to truly merge the site back into the landscape, legend says that trees were planted over the area, turning it into a forest or a dense grove. Over time, these trees would grow, their roots intertwining with the soil, further concealing any remaining trace. The silence of the steppe, broken only by the wind, would reclaim the area, holding its secret steadfastly for centuries. Today, despite countless expeditions, advanced satellite imagery, and the tireless efforts of archaeologists, the tomb of Genghis Khan remains undiscovered. It is arguably the most sought after archaeological prize in the world, yet it continues to elude all attempts at discovery. The most likely candidate for its location is the Khenti Mountains, a sacred and protected area in Mongolia, often referred to as Burhan Khaldun, where Genghis Khan is believed to have been born and to have often meditated. This rugged, untouched wilderness, with its dense forests and steep valleys, provides a natural fortress for the ultimate secret. The mystery adds to his legend, a final act of control from beyond the grave, ensuring that even in death, Genghis Khan remains an elusive, almost mythical figure. His spirit, the Mongols believe, still watches over his people from a grave known only to the eternal blue sky, Tengri, and the vast, silent, unchanging earth. It is a powerful testament to a man who, even after his passing, continues to command reverence and inspire awe, his physical resting place a secret held close by the very land he conquered and cherished. As we conclude our journey through the echoes of the Mongol Empire, let your mind gently wander over the images we have created together. The vastness of the steppe, the rhythm of galloping horses, the flickering light of a Jur's campfire. Hear the faint whisper of wind across the endless plains. Feel the cool touch of ancient stone. Allow these distant tales to become soft murmurs in your mind, gentle currents carrying you further and further into stillness. Release any tension in your shoulders. Let your breath grow slow and steady. Feel the weight of your body supported and at peace. The stories are fading now, dissolving into the quiet dark. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across the vast Mongolian sky until they too disappear. You are safe. You are still. Embrace the silence. Embrace the calm. Rest now in the quiet embrace of history. Let sleep find you gently, deeply.